And it's my great pleasure to welcome you here tonight to our Free Speech America Gala. But first, we'll begin by honoring this great country with our national anthem. So let me ask you to please stand at this time for the playing of the Star-Spangled Banner. This year's gala is noteworthy for a number of reasons. First, it's the Media Institute's signature event recognizing Free Speech Week, the national celebration of free speech and free press that takes place every October. We're proud that the Media Institute created this event in 2005 and continues to coordinate it almost 20 years later. Second, tonight we are celebrating the Media Institute's 45-year anniversary. Yep. Yeah, the Institute got its start in 1979 and has evolved along with this changing media industry, becoming a strong voice for the First Amendment in a competitive media environment. And we look forward to serving as that voice as the industry continues to evolve. Finally, tonight marks the one-year anniversary of a major initiative we unveiled at last year's gala. I'm referring to the Madison Project, Free Speech and Press in American Democracy. The Madison Project has spent the past year examining threats to free speech, free press, and the First Amendment in the United States, and assessing the impact of these threats on the future of American democracy at this critical moment in history. The project will continue this important research and public education effort through the end of 2025. I'm proud to say that two of our awardees tonight are directly involved in the Madison Project. Floyd Abrams is the chairman of the Madison Project Steering Committee, and Pat Butler is a member of that committee. In addition, the Madison Project published a very insightful issue paper by our featured speaker, FCC Commissioner Ana Gomez. We greatly appreciate their commitment to a free press and a strong democracy. Speaking of the First Amendment and the vital role of media in our democracy, we have a truly outstanding program for you tonight. We have a highly distinguished group of award recipients, Patrick Butler, Floyd Abrams, Dick Wiley, our presenters, Judy Woodruff and Dan Abrams, and our featured speaker, Commissioner Gomez. But before I introduce our featured speaker and then turn the program over to our Master of Ceremonies, I would briefly like to thank several persons I depend on who have helped make this evening possible, starting with my colleague, Susanna Cotto. Thank you, Susie. My thanks as well to John Taylor and Dave Arland for their video support, and to Anna Yan and Kimberly Falkenhagen for their terrific work with graphics and promotion. It's now my pleasure, in fact, a distinct privilege to introduce our featured speaker. The Honorable Ana Gomez was sworn in as a commissioner of the Federal Communications Commission in September of 2023. She brings more than 30 years of public and private sector experience to her position. Commissioner Gomez most recently served as a senior advisor for international information and communications policy at the U.S. Department of State. She served as Deputy Administrator of the National Telecommunications and Information Administration from 2009 to 2013. Commissioner Gomez also served for 12 years in various positions at the FCC, including as Deputy Chief of the International Bureau and a Senior Legal Advisor to Chairman William Kennard. Commissioner Gomez also served as a Senate staffer and as a Deputy Chief of Staff of the National Economic Council during the Clinton administration. Commissioner Gomez is the first Latina American to be confirmed to the FCC in more than 2 decades. She is committed to ensuring the United States enjoys a vibrant, strong, and competitive telecom and media marketplace. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Commissioner Ana Gomez.
That probably has to come down, doesn't it? Good evening. Gosh, it's good to see everyone here. Honestly, being among all these terrific defenders of our freedom of speech, of our First Amendment, is making me a little emotional, so thank you. And thank you, Rick, for that kind introduction. So we're just 1 week away from a critical election. And I am thinking a lot about the challenges that Americans are facing in navigating the news media environment and understanding what's happening in their local communities and across the country as they prepare to make important decisions at the ballot box. Though we live in a time when news media is at our fingertips, being a properly informed member of civil society can be an elusive goal. Mis and disinformation cloud our view of reality and inhibit our ability to discern the truth. I'm not exaggerating when I say concern about mis and disinformation is one of the issues raised most often with me since I became a commissioner. And I think it's a concern we all share. We are here tonight to celebrate those that have worked hard to preserve freedom of speech. So it is imperative that I flag at the outset that when it comes to mis and disinformation, regulatory options are limited, as they should be. The Commission is not in the business of regulating content, full stop. The criticality of the First Amendment cannot be overstated. Freedom of speech is a pillar of American democracy, and our country needs a press free from interference from regulators like me. There's no denying, however, that technological changes to the communications and media ecosystem over the last 30 years have transformed how we get our news. And still, media, in its various forms, has long had a powerful influence on our society. A timely and famous illustration of this influence was the 1938 adaptation of the book War of the Worlds into a Halloween episode on the CBS Mercury on the Air radio show featuring a fictional news bulletin about Martians invading, of all places, New Jersey. The program aired on October 30th and included disclaimers of its fictional content. And it is clear that those involved in the program's development and production never intended to mislead anyone. Nonetheless, some listeners missing the disclaimers sometimes confused the facts and mistook the program for a real news report about either a natural disaster or an invasion, with some confusion as to whether the invaders were Germans or Martians. The result was anxiety, fear, and outreach to the police and to the press. In addition to being a great story and launching Orson Welles' legendary career, the episode in history provides a lesson on the importance of context and evidence of the power that media holds over us, especially when the content presented to us elicits an emotional, fear-based response. In this case, War of the Worlds had limited listenership, and even a smaller subset of people who believed what they heard or what they thought they heard. But one can only imagine how far and wide a false story about a foreign threat could travel with the powerful media platforms we have today. Media today is more diverse and decentralized than it has ever been. Digital platforms have democratized content creation, allowing individuals and small organizations to publish far-reaching content. It provides a space for voices of all kinds, including those that have historically been marginalized or otherwise excluded by traditional media. And this is a huge win for free speech. However, the democratization of media comes with challenges as well. While journalistic integrity serves as the backbone of traditional news media, the same ethical standard is not always followed by social media content creators and sharers. This means that trustworthy content is dispersed into a sea of information with varying levels of reliability, making it difficult for the audience to know what to believe. When I spoke at the Media Institute luncheon earlier this year, I highlighted a February New York Times story that detailed the fallout from a rumor propagated on social media about #ArcStorm. One viral post from an emergency preparedness enthusiast claimed that a rare atmospheric onslaught and catastrophic statewide flooding were headed for California. Despite the lack of scientific evidence, the story gained momentum, fueled by the fear and panic of those resharing the post. I mused in my remarks then that rather than promoting a fake storm, that story could easily have been a false narrative downplaying the threat of a real imminent storm. I said that we couldn't afford to have a falsehood like that sow distrust in the systems that ensure the public's safety. Well, earlier this month, to my disappointment but not surprise, we saw just such a dangerous scenario play out, first with Hurricane Helene, and then again with Hurricane Milton. Untrustworthy news sources shared hoaxes and conspiracy theories to spark chaos and sow skepticism in our government's disaster response. The swirl of harmful rumors dissuaded survivors from seeking help and weakened morale among our first responders, particularly as they became the subject of threats. During times of crises, especially, local news keeps Americans informed. While the news of an impending storm might reach people through social media first, local broadcasters stand at the ready, providing timely updates and community-specific information in an easy-to-access, reliable format. As our nation contends with a growing frequency in weather-related disasters, it is imperative that we make preserving local media a priority. Preserving localism in broadcast media has long been one of the FCC's key pillars of media policy. Localism is rooted in the belief that broadcast stations should serve the needs and interests of their local communities. Over the past year, I have met with numerous broadcasters, from KSAT 12 in San Antonio, to Telemundo 51 in South Florida, to New Mexico PBS in Albuquerque, and just today, the FTTG Fox 5, just up the road in Bethesda, which I visited this afternoon. It is clear to me that local broadcasters have a unique ability to connect with their viewers. They provide Americans with the information they need, from making simple day-to-day decisions like what to wear based on the weather, to making big-picture decisions such as who should be the mayor in their next town. With mis and disinformation on the rise, localism in media is as important as ever. Thus, as new forms of media are disrupting the media marketplace, our challenge is to strike a balance between preserving the local news we so desperately need and embracing the benefits of new media forms, all while combating misinformation. Regardless of where the changes in the media ecosystem take us, we must continue to view localism as a key pillar of media policy in America. Local media is one of the most powerful defenses we have against mis and disinformation, and I strongly believe it will continue to serve us well. So congratulations to Floyd Abrams, to Patrick Butler, and to Dick Wiley. We are all grateful for your contributions to media policy and the preservation of free speech. Finally, thank you to the Media Institute for having me here tonight, and happy Halloween to you all.
Get my papers organized here. I'm accused of having too much paper. Oh, thank you, Commissioner. And it's now my pleasure to introduce tonight's Master of Ceremonies. Dick Wiley is a co-founder of Wiley Ryan LLP, a law firm with one of the largest communications practices in the United States. In the 1970s, he was a general counsel, a commissioner, and chairman of the Federal Communications Commission. Since then, he has been one of the most highly regarded and highly respected attorneys in Washington. And of course, Dick serves with great distinction as chairman of the Media Institute's Board of Trustees. Dick is serving a dual role here this evening, both as our Master of Ceremonies and as one of our award recipients. I told Dick that even though we're giving him an award tonight, we're not letting him off the hook from his Master of Ceremonies duties. So I'll have a little more to say about him later on as our award recipient, but for now, I will ask him to put on his Master of Ceremonies hat and take over the program. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our Master of Ceremonies, the Chairman of the Board, Mr. Dick Wiley.
Thank you very much, Rick, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to see such a terrific turnout this evening. As Rick mentioned, this is now the awards portion of our program. We have two major awards this evening. And to present our American Horizon Award to a great friend of the Media Institute and to so many of us here this evening, it's my great pleasure to introduce a well-known and highly respected broadcast journalist, Judy Woodruff. Ms. Woodruff is now senior correspondent of the PBS NewsHour after having served for over a decade as its renowned anchor and news editor. And she just last year has started a very important new broadcasting assignment, America at the Crossroads, designed to study our political divide in this country. And just last year, our guest celebrated career has spurned 5 decades, if you can believe that, and 12 presidential elections. And for NBC, CNN, and of course, PBS. In doing so, she has received numerous honors, including an Emmy for a lifetime achievement in television news. So, ladies and gentlemen, please greet this enduring presence on the broadcast screen, Judy Woodruff.
Thank you so much, Dick Wiley, for that very generous introduction. It's hard to believe it's been 12 elections in 50 years, but it has been, and boy, do I feel lucky to be able to work in American journalism over this extraordinary period in our lives. I am so honored to be with all of you tonight. I want to thank the Media Institute for this wonderful dinner. Congratulations to all of tonight's awardees. And I have to say, it is a thrill for me to introduce the winner of the American Horizon Award, someone I have known for more than 4 decades, going way back to the days when he was an aide to his fellow Tennessean, Republican Senator Howard Baker, including during those years when Baker was the Senate Majority Leader. I was a reporter then for NBC News. My fiance at the time, a man named Al Hunt, was covering Capitol Hill for the Wall Street Journal. And Senator Baker and his staff were among the most respected and admired in the entire Congress. It was said that if they worked for Senator Baker, they were honest, they were really smart, and they were patriots. and that defined Pat Butler. In fact, Pat had already proven just how precocious he was. He started out as a newspaper reporter in Chattanooga, Tennessee, appropriate for all of us who celebrate journalism. He moved to Washington to work for the House Judiciary Committee. From there, he became a speechwriter for President Gerald Ford. Pat was in the room where it happened from his earliest days in Washington. When Howard Baker was asked to become President Reagan's White House Chief of Staff, Pat was his special assistant. Moving to the private sector, it wasn't long before he was named vice president at the Times Mirror Company, which was then the corporate parent of the Los Angeles Times. Along the way, he helped to found a program that evolved into the Pew Research Center, which, as everybody knows today, to be one of the world's leading and the country's most respected public opinion research institution. He then spent almost 2 decades at the Washington Post Company as one of its top executives, where, among other things, he founded and led Newsweek Productions, which created award-winning documentary programming. All this before he became president and CEO of America's Public Television Stations, the organization that represents licensees operating 356 public TV stations across the country, and which serves more than 97% of the American people. There, as its longest-serving leader until he stepped down earlier this year, Pat turned around an organization that was losing members and ensured the long-term survival of public media, in part by emphasizing its role in public education. PBS President Paula Kerger said that Pat, she told me, paid him the highest compliment. She said, Pat is one of the nation's great citizens, someone who cares deeply about civic life and civic education. Under Pat's leadership at APTS, federal and state funding for public broadcasting reached record levels. Congress enacted a new Next Generation Warning System, a program that enables public broadcasters to be reliable participants in safety communications at the federal, state, and local level. APTS focused on what it called 3 pillars of local public service: education, doing things like partnering with rural school districts in Nevada to reach the students they need to reach; in public safety, for one example, partnering with the California Office of Emergency Services to provide early earthquake warnings to 40 million people; and in civic leadership, working, for example, with the state legislature in Ohio to bring transparency and accountability to the work of government. There are more examples than I could possibly name of moves by Pat that have won bipartisan support in Congress and among political leaders at the state and local level. Pat had a vision for what public media could and should be. APTS's board chair, Franz Joachim, who runs New Mexico PBS, says that Pat has been an innovator and a builder, that he made it possible for hundreds of local public TV stations to make their case before Congress and before state capitals in ways that appeal to the entire political spectrum, from the far left to the far right. In fact, Republican Congressman Jake Ellzey of Texas, who is one of the co-chairs of the Public Broadcasting Caucus in the House, said of Pat, he said, "Your leadership and vision have been instrumental in shaping the landscape of public broadcasting. You have left an indelible mark in our country." Pat's successor as the president of America's Public Television Stations, Kate Riley, who's here tonight, told me that Pat's leadership and mentorship have had a profound impact on her, have not only made a smooth transition possible, but will also continue to inspire in that role for years to come. And we know that Pat has shared his energy and talent far beyond APTS. Here at the Media Institute, you heard this a few minutes ago, he's been instrumental, along with Floyd Abrams, in establishing the Madison Project out of deep concerns over threats to freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedoms that our democracy depends on. And now, just 1 week away from the election, at a time when we see social media in its best and worst forms, as we just heard from the commissioner, when misinformation and disinformation seem to be at a fever pitch, the work of the Madison Project could not be more important. Pat also serves on the board of the Howard Baker Center for Public Policy at the University of Tennessee, on the board of the Better Angels Society, supporting the work of America's documentarian Ken Burns, and he's been deeply involved in the DC College Access Program, which over the last 25 years has helped more than 30,000 DC public school graduates attend college. And Don Graham, who is the former publisher of the Washington Post company, is someone I know who has been instrumental in seeing that program come to life and provide the service that it has. Bottom line, the character and values that Pat Butler embodies are exactly the values we look for in difficult times like right now. Honesty, hard work, love of country, and a vision of what the future should look like. It's his deep love of America that has driven Pat from his earliest days as a journalist, and then a speechwriter for a president, an aide to one of the nation's most inspirational political leaders, and now his passion for strengthening education and spreading information that lifts us up instead of tearing us down. So it's why I am so proud to present my friend Pat Butler with the Media Institute's American Horizon Award.
Wow. Thank you, Judy. To be introduced by the legendary Judy Woodruff, and especially in this most generous way, is honor enough for me. And I'm tempted to sit down right now and just savor her very kind words. To be in the company of Floyd Abrams and Dick Wiley, two of my heroes, in receiving awards tonight from the Media Institute richly compounds the honor, and to have all this fuss made over me in the presence of my family very nearly leaves me speechless. But this being Washington, not quite. When I was 11 years old, living in the tiny community of Kimball, Tennessee, my parents let me stay home from school and watch the inauguration of President Kennedy and hear his stirring call to ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. That moment was the beginning of my passion to serve my country in whatever way I could. 14 years later, I was a presidential speechwriter myself, and I became friends with Ted Sorensen, who had helped President Kennedy craft his inaugural address. When I had occasion to ask how much of that speech was his and how much was the president's, Ted diplomatically replied, "Ask not." As we approach the 250th anniversary of America's Declaration of Independence, my friends in public media are inaugurating a campaign to remind all of us of our first inspiration to become good citizens and encouraging us to ask again what we can do for our country. This initiative in civic leadership, encompassing programming, education, and community outreach, is exactly what we've come to expect of public media, which I consider a treasure beyond price. St. Judy Woodruff has been on the road the past few years, searching for the ties that bind us as a people in this contentious era, and she is finding them. Ken Burns will bring a 12-hour history of the American Revolution to public television next year, and he will remind us that even on the fundamental question of independence, colonial Americans were deeply divided, and yet we rallied to a cause that changed the world. Such context is immensely useful to us as we navigate our own sea of troubles 2.5 centuries later. At their best, media can help us better understand the perennial competition of ideas and interests and the motivations of those with whom we disagree. And this understanding is essential to our exercise of self-government. It is no coincidence that public media consistently rank among the most trusted institutions in America, because it is our mission to reflect the real America, its history, its heartland, its complexity, its true character in all that we do. In addition to the Woodruffs and the Burnses and others familiar to a national audience, 20,000 people working in hundreds of local public media stations across our country are profoundly committed to this mission. And the closer we get to the people who actually make America work, the more credible we are to them, and the more confident we all can be that the good sense and goodwill of the American people are equal to any challenge we may face as a nation. Some of us in this room can remember the calamitous year of 1968, when our country was beset by war and protests, assassinations and riots, tanks in our streets and hostility in our hearts. We feared that America was falling apart, that the center would not hold. And yet it did, because we, the people, decided that it must, that a house divided against itself could not stand. We decided that if we wanted self-government to work, we have to govern ourselves, not only at the polling place, but in our personal conduct toward one another. And if we want America to work, we have to make it work ourselves, both by doing our civic duty on Election Day and by investing our own talents, perhaps modest in themselves, but mighty in their multitudes and immortal in their influence, in the success of our communities and the progress of our country. Teaching a child, caring for the sick, rescuing those in peril, comforting those in need, doing all the things good people do for one another every day in America without recognition or reward. Such work is sacred, for as both the Talmud and the Quran tell us, who saves one life saves the world entire. In anxious and corrosive times like these, it may seem daunting or even foolhardy to think that we can find national reconciliation in these countless deeds of quiet grace. But I believe that with Winston Churchill, that Americans can always be counted on to do the right thing after exhausting all the alternatives. And so I accept this award with deep gratitude and with an abiding faith that the American horizon is not only bright, but brilliant if we, the people, will make it so. As President Kennedy concluded on that cold, snowy day in Washington so long ago, let us go forth to lead the land we love, asking his blessing and his help, but knowing that here on earth, God's work must truly be our own. Thank you very much.
Congratulations, Pat. And now, ladies and gentlemen, to present our honored recipient of the Institute's Freedom of Speech Award, I want to introduce someone who knows him extremely well. I refer, of course, to his son. And this is his son, Dan Abrams, who also has a remarkable career as a leading broadcast journalist. Serving variously, and just get these points, as chief legal correspondent for ABC News, host of the Dan Abrams Show on News Nation, host of On Patrol Live on Reels, host of Where Politics Meets the Law on SiriusXM, and host and executive producer on Court Cam and Taking a Stand on the A&E network. And all this, ladies and gentlemen, he is also founder of the Law and Crime Network and co-author of best-selling books on significant but often forgotten trials. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome this outstanding legal journalist, Dan Abrams.
So first, let me just say, it's pretty cool to be able to give an award to your dad, all right? It's just, so I want to thank the Media Institute for affording me that opportunity and this opportunity, particularly with this kind of esteemed group here. When I was in 7th grade, I had an English teacher ask me what my parents did, and I informed her that my dad was a First Amendment lawyer. And she said, First Amendment lawyer? She said, there's no such thing as a First Amendment lawyer. So I went back home, and I said to my dad, Mrs. Sherman says that there's no such thing as a First Amendment lawyer. And he was amused and said, well, you're right. That is what I do, but she's right. That's not really something that people recognize as a career, because I may be the only one. And at the time, he was the only one who was a First Amendment lawyer. And for 50 years, he worked at one law firm. Now, right there, that should tell you something. But more importantly, as all of you know who are lawyers, when you work at a big corporate law firm, you are judged on how much you bill, right? My dad was never a great recruiter of business or billing. He was lucky that the business sort of came to him. But he was one of those rare corporate lawyers who turned down as much business as he did receive. Because a lot of the people who wanted to hire him were high-profile or wealthy individuals who wanted to sue someone else or sue the media for something that was said or done. And, most corporate lawyers will tell you, particularly when the money's right, I can represent either side. I can take a side of the case and represent the person, particularly in a really interesting, potentially constitutional case. But for 50 years, he refused those cases again and again. And by the way, in some of those cases, he was actually sympathetic to the person who was suing. He didn't like what was done to that person. He didn't like the other side of it and would have been thrilled to see that person pay a price. So why not take a case if he believed, let's say, the First Amendment wouldn't or shouldn't apply? I mean, we all agree the First Amendment is not absolute. And the reason is because throughout his career, he decided to protect the First Amendment and not to seek to test or degrade it. He cares too deeply about the principle of it. I mean, heck, he represented Senator Mitch McConnell, with whom he disagrees politically on just about everything, for free in the Citizens United case. Why? Because he believed Senator McConnell was right. And most importantly, because he believed that the position in Citizens United with regard to free speech when it comes to unions and corporations was to expand the First Amendment, not to narrow it. And as a result of that, many of his liberal friends denounced him, distanced themselves from him. There's a documentary out about my dad that came out last year with a lot of sort of the typical sort of liberal First Amendment advocates distancing themselves from Floyd Abrams because they didn't like the position that he took in the Citizens United case. Now, it used to be, of course, that liberals would cloak themselves in the First Amendment, and these days it's more conservatives who are cloaking themselves in the First Amendment. But the reality is, for Floyd Abrams, his positions haven't changed with the political winds. I'll give you an example. He does not believe that every disclosure of the most sensitive documents, no matter how the documents were obtained, should be celebrated. He was very critical of Julian Assange for distributing WikiLeaks, but he still maintained that Assange should be protected by the First Amendment. His legal assessment when it comes to the First Amendment may not lead to the position that he agrees with as a matter of policy. Same way, he doesn't want racist, spewing, hateful language, but he still believes that the First Amendment usually protects them. And what I love about that is he doesn't mind when people disagree with him. He doesn't mind when people even attack him. You know, some people have called my dad a First Amendment absolutist. You know, I think that may lead to a little bit of a misunderstanding of his position. That might suggest that he doesn't recognize that there are cases where the First Amendment shouldn't be invoked, even if it can be. He's more a sort of a First Amendment apostle, a crusader, but most importantly, he's a First Amendment guardian who has devoted his entire career at times to taking positions that are unpopular from one side or another, because he believes in how important the principle is. And that is why he is so deserving of this award tonight.
Well, what can a father say after that? I think he's got a future. And apropos of that, let me just tell you one story about him. When Daniel was at Duke, he and a fellow student had a broadcasting show on Duke television. President Reagan came to Duke as a guest, and they covered Reagan's arrival, helicopter down at Duke, etc. And they did it in a way, how shall I say, of rather young people. I mean, I wouldn't say giggling, but sort of laughing a little bit about the whole thing. But they covered it. And by chance, and Dan sent me, I asked him for a copy of it. By chance, I was having dinner with Dan Rather not long afterwards, and I happened to mention it to him. And he said, well, send me a copy. I did. And he watched it, and he called me. He said, you know, he could make a living. And that was the first time it even occurred to me that this might have something to do with real life, post-college, real life, etc. I've been very fortunate to have Dan as my son and my daughter Ronnie as a daughter. We do talk. We used to talk when they were smaller than this, well, much smaller, when they were children. I used to put them to bed with telling stories about cases. Cases are much more interesting than fairy tales, and they listen. What can I say? So I will say it's especially moving to me to have Daniel not only be the one who gave me this wonderful award, but who spoke so generously about me. The rest I'll deal with privately. I really do appreciate all of you here. I do have to say that I've known Dick Wiley a long time. We practiced on the same cases often with respect to broadcast regulation. I don't know Judy Woodruff at all as well, but I've learned from her through the years by watching her. And I've always appreciated how much she had to teach me. And I will say that I'm very grateful for this award, for Rick and the people connected with this organization who are willing to spend their time, their focus, their emphasis on making the First Amendment a living document in a most important and valuable way. I wanted to read to you 2 lines because I think they make an interesting point about our First Amendment. We are, of course, not the only country that has in its Constitution some sort of provision dealing with freedom of speech or of the press. A lot of countries do. And there are institutions, including the World Press Freedom Entity, which ranks countries with respect to how much they abide by their promises of free speech or free press. Let me read you one of a constitutional provision still in effect in a foreign country. It says, quote, "Citizens are guaranteed freedom of speech, of press, of assembly, demonstration, and association." Not bad, very similar to the First Amendment. That's Article 67 of the North Korean Constitution. North Korea, there is this ranking entity I referred to, the World Press Freedom Index. North Korea wound up 177 out of 180 countries in terms of how they treat freedom of speech and freedom of the press. They don't lack for the words. They lack for living in a society and governing a society in a way that makes their equivalent of the First Amendment meaningful. Here's another example. It says that, quote, "Every person shall have the right of freedom of thought, conscience, and belief. Every person shall have the protection of freedom of speech and expression, which include the freedom of press and other media." It's really not bad, and it's also not unfamiliar to us, albeit in somewhat different words than our First Amendment. That is Article 19 of the Constitution of Eritrea. Eritrea has the distinction when countries are listed in terms of how much or how little freedom of speech and freedom of the press they allow, of being last. I mean, in a world filled with countries that do not allow much freedom of speech or press, they are 180 out of 180. And it's been just striking to me with my practice and my interest through the years, how often one has to go beyond the words of a law, even a constitutional law, to see if people and countries are serious about protecting freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and the like. I mean, think of it. Our country was formed in what they finally came out with after a lot of discussion about whether to have a Bill of Rights at all, and initially a vote against it when the framers met in Philadelphia in 1787. But there was another view. Jefferson had it in Paris as our first ambassador, and other people did, and the public seemed to want it. And so they wound up drafting what became the First Amendment, which, as you all know, begins with freedom of religion and then moves on to Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, and then goes on to freedom of assembly. They worked hard on the drafting of it, and it has occurred to me more than once that it's never been the language, it's never been the particular language that they chose towards the end of the 18th century, which has carried the day for us, and which has allowed us to live in, both on a comparative level with the rest of the world, including very democratic countries, and even a more abstract way of looking at these freedoms. It has really been remarkable how much we have by way of free speech and free press. We don't win all our cases. There are no clients here, right? Yeah, right. Yeah, so we don't win all our cases, and there are some people, serious people, that might think that we shouldn't win all of the cases that we're involved with. But it is remarkable and cheering, I think, that we have come so far in the direction of protecting freedom of speech and freedom of the press, that while we have lots of issues to decide, many of which are genuinely difficult, new forms of communication that the framers could not have even imagined, and that it is even hard sometimes for us to imagine. Forms of communication which require no human involvement at all. And then someday, some judges, not so far in the future, I think, are going to have to decide, well, is that what the First Amendment's about? Even if what the speech deals with the sort of subjects the First Amendment generally does protect. We'll have lots of cases and lots of challenges in addressing what the 18th century freedom of speech and of the press mean. But it is worth pausing now and then to say we've really come a long way. We should be very proud of how much we have as a country protected freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and as well that first listing in the First Amendment, freedom of religion. it's worth celebrating. And if I had a glass from my table here in front of me, I would call for a toast. But toast aside, it's a great record that we've had, and I'm glad to share with you and to appreciate with you just that. Thank you all very much.
Well, thank you, Floyd. We're thrilled to be honoring you and Pat Butler this evening, and I want you to know how much we appreciate everything that you both have done for the First Amendment, for free speech and freedom of the press, and for our democracy. Thank you. And I want to thank Commissioner Gomez for your inspiring and challenging words, thanking our presenters for their very personal and heartfelt introductions, giving us some new added insight into our awardees. But now we come to our very special Lifetime Achievement Award. I can't think of anyone who deserves this award more, or whom I'd rather have the Institute honor in this way. Dick Wiley is a Washington legend, pure and simple. I've had the good fortune of having Dick as my boss for the last 7 years, and I couldn't ask for a better one. As our chairman of the board, Dick is deeply committed to the Media Institute. He cares about this organization, and he works in many ways, from lining up luncheon speakers and gala participants to serving as our long-running master of ceremonies of this event. And he does all of this because he believes in our mission, and he wants the Institute to succeed. But of course, the Media Institute is just one small part of Dick's long and storied career. To help you better appreciate his incredible legacy, we'd like to show you a brief video that recounts the full scope of Dick's achievements.
Dick is a force of nature. He is an incredibly intelligent man, a warm man. There is a lot of depth beneath the persona that everybody sees.
I think Dick Wiley is a type person who's everything to everybody. He is the most adaptable, flexible attorney that I know.
I've known Dick for over 40 years. He is an extraordinary executive. He is very connected into the Washington scene. He is trustworthy. He is hardworking. He's strategic.
I would describe Dick as a visionary, an innovator, and a leader. He's someone who early on recognized the power of local television, and as FCC chairman, he was determined to hold all of us to a very high standard.
Dick is the father of HDTV in terms of making it happen in the United States. Not being a scientist, he chaired the process with the government and industry together, working, defined the goals we wanted to get to, which was a uniquely American digital broadcast standard. And now, as Americans see a great sporting event or a movie on television, they look how crisp and clear it is, and it's against the wall, and it's flat, and it's beautiful, and we've gone to 4K, 8K. It stems from what Dick Wiley drove us to as a nation.
In addition to high-definition television, he also made dramatic changes in regulation. There was a time when you could only own 7 AM and 7 FM radio stations and television stations like that. Dick changed that, and that made broadcasting, television, and radio a much bigger business.
Dick made the FCC more efficient by streamlining the administrative process, and under his leadership, the commission produced 4 times the number of decisions that were released under previous administrations. He was also a consensus builder. Many of the decisions he reached under his leadership were unanimous.
Even when he wasn't the chairman, he was an influential person. Dick started Wiley Rhine, a very influential, very important law firm.
And instead of just going out and hiring people from law school, Dick went out and got people who were like-minded. that had a collegial atmosphere, that were pleasant people and super competent, often coming from government. He pieced them together rapidly and became the #1 communications firm in the country, if not the world.
He continued to advocate for technological advances in television like ATSC 3.0 to better serve the viewing audiences and to continue to open up opportunities for data transmission.
He was always accessible. He was always available, whether it be on weekends or holidays. I was always able to talk to Dick. So the fact that I'm now told he had a family life is shocking to me.
I've witnessed the absolute love and respect that Dick feels for his wife, Betty, who has been his partner throughout his long career. He's got some terrific kids who are very loyal to their dad, and grandchildren now who they are the lights of his life, provided they all become baseball players.
Well, it would be easy to point to Dick's work at the FCC as a champion for HDTV as his legacy. But I really believe his legacy will be the people that he mentored and the examples that he set for the broadcast industry. A defender of free speech, an incredible advocate for local broadcasters, and a true believer in the benefits of technological innovation.
Dick's legacy is what we all should hope for. He made the world better. He made it clearer, 16:9 with a beautiful picture. And that beautiful picture, though, is a life well lived that has focused on ethics and doing things to improve the human condition. And I think nothing could be better than that.
You know, Dick is such a towering figure that tonight we have not one, but 2 award presenters. And I'll ask them to come up on stage now. Kathy Kirby is a partner at Wiley Rhine, where she chairs the telecom, media, and technology practice and sits on the firm's executive committee. In addition, she currently serves as president of the Federal Communications Bar Association. Kathy has been a media lawyer for more than 3 decades and has worked with Dick since 1998. I would guess that no one, with the exception of Betty Wiley, of course, knows Dick better. Meanwhile, John Taylor is Senior Vice President of Public Affairs for LG Electronics USA. He's the company's most senior corporate affairs and government relations executive in the United States. And I'm proud to say that he's a longtime member of the Media Institute's Board of Trustees. John first met Dick Wiley in 1988 and then worked with him in the early 1990s on the development of standards for high-definition television. And I might add that John worked with our good friends at the NAB to produce the wonderful tribute video we just watched. Thank you, John. With our presenters in place, at this time, let me ask them to turn it over to Mr. Dick Wiley, come forward and receive his Lifetime Achievement Award.
Thanks so much, Rick. You know, one cannot overstate the positive and enduring impact this man has had on so many. For John and me, tonight is as much personal as it is business.
But you want to hear from the man himself, so we'll just give you a word or two about Dick.
Kind.
Generous.
Supportive.
Encouraging.
Brilliant.
Humble.
Visionary.
Inspiring.
Unwavering.
Unflappable.
Faith.
Family.
Husband.
Grandfather.
Father of Doug and Pam.
Father of HDTV.
Respect.
Integrity.
Counselor.
Confidant.
Boss.
Leader.
Mentor.
Dear friend. Ladies and gentlemen, congratulations to a great American, the Media Institute's Lifetime Achievement honoree,
the Honorable Richard E. Wiley.
Well, my goodness. Thanks for all those all too kind remarks, not only by Rick Kaplar, but by so many people here this evening. It's really a wonderful honor for me to receive. But you know, I feel certain that some of you are wondering, just how old does someone have to be to get a Lifetime Achievement Award? And you know, I don't really know the answer to that, but I have a feeling that I fully qualify in that respect. But seriously, ladies and gentlemen, it's really a privilege to receive this award from the Institute's president. Because for many years, I worked very closely with Rick Kaplar and indeed his predecessor, Patrick Maines, and I was able to observe firsthand all of the talent and effort and leadership that Rick provides to the association and all of the effort he makes to foster our activities, including planning and executing this wonderful gala year after year. So Rick, I want to thank you for thinking of this award for me, and I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate even more Rick's dedication to the principles and goals of the Media Institute, in particular, the importance of freedom of speech to our nation. So, ladies and gentlemen, someday, I think Rick Kaplar may receive a Lifetime Achievement Award, but only, yes, but only if he meets that key criterion, which he's not going to get to as yet. But thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And guess what? This brings us to the conclusion of tonight's program. That's the best words you can ever say. In conclusion, of the two happiest words in the English language. But before we conclude, I would like to ask everyone to join me in a well-deserved round of applause for Commissioner Gomez and Pat Butler, and of course, the great Floyd Abrams. Let's give it to him. Ladies and gentlemen, we are adjourned. Please have a safe journey home. Thank you very much.